There we go.
Okay, so hi, this is Mr. Cuffs. We're doing a review session. We're using the questions, the 25 questions that I made up. Yesterday we did 2, 5, 8, and 19. If you want to go back and watch yesterday's video. And for today's video, we're going to pick some other random questions and we're going to answer it. And the first one that we wanted to talk about was question 20, which is, to what extent did the role of the federal government change under President Theodore Roosevelt in regards to two of the following: labor, trusts, conservation, and world affairs? So I wanted to break down this entire era and talk about Teddy Roosevelt. So first of all, we got to talk about the era. So Teddy becomes president with the death of McKinley in 1901. And if you're going to write an essay, you can call Teddy TR. You just have to introduce his name once, and then for saving time, you can reference to him as TR every time that follows. Does that make sense? That's a really good essay trick. So you don't have to reference him as Teddy Roosevelt the entire time, just once. Teddy is a Republican president. He's from New York, and he is progressive. And the most important word with Teddy in domestic policy is the word progressive. The progressive era is Teddy's era. He is the progressive president. His two presidents that came after are part of it. The progressive era is from 1901 to U.S. entry in World War I. That's the progressive era, and Teddy is the progressive president. What do we mean by that? It means that Teddy is making it a mission to fix the things that went wrong, to make progress from the Industrial Revolution. So the progressive era is a response to the problems of so it's a cause-effect thing. It's the response to the problems of the Industrial Revolution. And Teddy is going to tackle a whole bunch of different subjects. First and foremost, Teddy is going to take on monopolies, or trusts as they're called. Teddy wants to bust bad trusts that aren't in the consumer's favor. And he earns the nickname the Trust Buster. And his domestic policy is called the Square Deal. And the Square Deal means that bad trusts go away. If it's a bad trust, like Standard Oil, if it's not serving consumers, he breaks up the trust. So what we see with Teddy is the government as a response to solve problems. There were journalists who exposed problems in this era, and Teddy gave them a nickname. Anybody remember? What are they called? The journalists that exposed problems. Anybody? Muckrakers. Excellent. Muckrakers. Muckrakers are journalists that expose problems, like Upton Sinclair, Jacob Riis, Ida Tarbell, Ida Wells, Lincoln Steffens, Frank Norris, Sidney McClure. All those people exposed all the ills of the Industrial Revolution. Teddy is the government response, right? Let's give a perfect example. We talked yesterday about Upton Sinclair. Upton Sinclair writes The Jungle. Teddy reads it. What does Teddy do? He vomits. He stops eating meat for a year. And then what does he do? He goes to Congress and pushes them to push legislation, like the Meat Inspection Act and the Pure Food and Drug Act. That's Teddy's responsiveness and progressiveness in this era. What else does Teddy tackle in this era? Conservation. I'll use green. Teddy becomes the conservation president. What do I mean by that? Well, Teddy believes in our forests and our wildlife, and he wants to preserve all that. And so he creates national park system and promotes the agenda of conserving our country and our wildlife before any other president cared about it. So just an example of Teddy in conservation. Labor. Teddy takes the side of labor over business, which is totally different than the laissez-faire attitude of the late 1800s. Teddy becomes pro-organized labor. What's an example? the coal miners strike because they're being mistreated and underpaid for their work. He threatens the owners and not the workers that he will take over the mines and send the military in to run the mines because he's got to keep the mines going. Forces the owners and the workers to sit together and to collectively bargain. So Teddy has shown time and time again that he is going to force his way into using his position as president, his bully pulpit, as he calls it, as a response to help problems in the nation. Okay? Last thing, this is a little bit different. This is not his domestic policy, it's his foreign policy. His foreign policy is his big stick policy. He's a lot more aggressive with words, but not really. Because his quote is, speak softly. It's an old African proverb. Speak softly, but carry a big stick. And what he means by that is, don't use words, use action threats. And what he means by that is to strengthen the United States Navy and military presence around the world so that nobody messes with us. So he's a former Assistant Secretary of the Navy. He's a former Rough Rider in the Spanish-American War. He believes a strong military is the way to get respect in the world. Remember, this is the era of imperialism. And Teddy wants respect around the world. He comes up with the Great White Fleet. He parades it around Tokyo Bay. Makes the Japanese mad. They end up bombing us 40 years later. He believes in cutting through and doing whatever we had to do to cut a hole in the Isthmus of Panama to build a canal. So his foreign policy is to take a direct presence in our hemisphere. That's the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. So those are the four things: labor, trust, conservation, and world affairs. As you can see, Teddy might have only been president for under 8 years, but he's a huge presence and dominating presence in the White House. So that's it for number 20. Okay, I'm going to try to do a couple more. We wanted to do, if you look at your sheet, we wanted to talk about question 15. To what extent were the goals of Reconstruction regarding African Americans achieved or not achieved by 1900? Let's talk about Reconstruction. Let's move this up. The Reconstruction era is a cause-effect of the Civil War. The Civil War is 1861 to 65, and that leads directly to the Reconstruction, both physical and psychological Reconstruction, which is 1865 to 1877. That's Reconstruction. The radical Republicans, who are on the side of the African Americans, are in charge of Reconstruction, led by Thaddeus Stevens and others, much to the chagrin to 17th President Andrew Johnson, who himself was not a Republican and didn't like the radical Republicans. That's why they impeached him. The radical Republicans wanted to punish the South, the white Southern racists, for slavery and for the Civil War. And so they split the South into military zones. Remember the military zones? Let's draw the South here. Horrible map. They split the South into 5 military zones. And during this time frame, they oversaw the rebuilding of the South through Reconstruction. They split it into 5 military zones. The goal was to protect African Americans as they transition back into not only ending slavery, but getting equal citizenship, and the 15th Amendment, black men getting the right to vote. So these amendments are the goals. The goals are the 13th Amendment. All of them are passed in this era. The 14th and the 15th. The 13th is end of slavery in writing. The 14th is an extension of the first, meaning equal citizenship for anyone born here. In other words, it doesn't matter color of skin or circumstance. If you're born here, you're an American citizen with the same rights as everybody else. 15th is black male suffrage. It's really universal male suffrage, but I said black because this is what's important. So these are goals. These are goals of the radical Republicans for African Americans to transition back into society. And what we see is 9 African Americans serve in Congress in this time frame in the South. 9. But when Reconstruction ends in 1877, that number will dwindle for almost 100 years to 0. Why? Well, because once the protection of the United States military is gone in the South, the Redeemer governments of white Southerners take over and the blacks lose power. So the efforts by 1900 were not what they had hoped. The word is Jim Crow. The South becomes all, let me move this up, the South becomes all Jim Crow laws. What are Jim Crow laws? Laws of legal segregation. The separation of races, which the decision in 1896 of Plessy versus Ferguson upheld segregation and said it was okay. It ruled that Homer Plessy, because he was black, was illegal to ride on a train that black people weren't allowed on, provided there was equal transportation, which we know there's never equal transportation because the system's rigged to screw over black people in this era. So that's what's happening in the South. Are Southerners getting that 15th Amendment, the right to vote? Well, no. In many Southern places, they're finding tactics like poll taxes, literacy tests, and grandfather clause to keep black men from voting, to keep them from voting. So again, goals of the Reconstruction era to help transition blacks were unsuccessful. If you want to take a position, what would have been successful for African Americans would have been to give them land, to give them property. But instead, what type of work did they do? They worked the same farms they were slaves on, but as sharecroppers, which was just enough of a share to pay for room and board. They were free to leave, but where are they going? So was Reconstruction successful long-term for African Americans? Heck no. Took another 100 years for African Americans to have. Were there successful things that happened? Sure. In the late 1800s, we see all black colleges. We see the Freedmen's Bureau help blacks get education. There's a lot of initiatives for African Americans in this era. But ultimately, racism's deep, and it's deep-rooted and it's strong, and it won't be till the 1950s that we start to see change. And even then, there's tons of resistance in the 50s and 60s. Are we good with that one? That's number 20. Okay, let's try to do one more. Let's try to do one more. The other one I wanted to do was, I saw it this morning. Okay, we want to do number 4. Analyze the political, diplomatic, and military reasons for United States victory in the Revolutionary War. Confine your answer to the period of 1775 to 1783. So they don't want you to write about like the Boston Tea Party except for the context point because that was 2 years earlier. And they don't want you to write about the Constitution because that was 1787. They want you to confine it to Lexington and Concord, which is 1775, Bunker Hill, the war begins. This is a timeline. 1776, July 4th, the Declaration of Independence is signed, gives the war a purpose. 1777, the Battle of Saratoga is a turning point. 1781, the Battle of Yorktown is the British surrender. 1783 is our formal recognition in the land to the Mississippi in the Treaty of Paris. So these are really the 4 or 5 highlights of the war that they're talking about. And they give you a built-in thesis statement where they want to know, it's asking for political, diplomatic, and military. So political, diplomatic, and military. Military will be the easiest one to write about. Political will be the hardest. Diplomatic is basically Franklin getting the French to help, which won't happen until this battle, when the French realize that this isn't just a mother and son civil war, that this was an actual winnable war for independence to weaken Great Britain. France loved that opportunity. But it wouldn't be till we proved with this Saratoga battle down 2 hours away by car east of here, 2.5 hours, that we were worthy. It wouldn't just be France. We would also get help from other, Polish General Pulaski, other European exports that want to take Britain down. So diplomatically, it was really important that Americans like Benjamin Franklin are over there courting diplomacy means how we deal with foreign countries, okay? Politically, it's Congress, the Continental Congress, that is debating, but they don't really do too much. If I look at the way this question 4 is framed, analyze how political helped victory, other than the Declaration of Independence giving a cause to the war, and you would talk about that, and giving an audience, that recognizes around Europe that what King George III had done to us, and gives ideas of what a perfect government is, I don't particularly think that the Continental Congress was strong. They obviously couldn't tax. They weren't really providing military with the proper things that they needed. So I would say that to what extent, politically, not so much. Diplomatic, a lot. Politically, not a lot. Diplomatic, a lot. Military, a lot. But it's because of Washington and his leadership. And if I was writing about this, I would gush over Washington in the morale boost, because even though we had a lot of disadvantages, like untrained troops, okay, we were really good at firing our guns because we had a lot of hunting experience. We also had an advantage that we were fighting on our home field, in our own backyards and apple orchards. We also had an advantage that we were fighting for a cause, which was liberty and freedom. And so Washington was able to boost the morale. In terms of military strategy, it wasn't until the French showed up that we started coming up with strategy. And the only reason we got the surrender at Yorktown is because we trapped General Cornwallis in a peninsula. And so that's important. Another military advantage is we didn't have to win outright. We just had to keep tying till England quit. And that's a little bit of a military advantage. Any questions? I'm going to stop there with 3, and we'll do those 3. Thank you so much for listening, people. Thanks. Thank you.